Amelia Parker sat silently by her son's hospital bed, her eyes burning from 3 sleepless nights. Inside the pediatric ICU at St. Augustine Medical Center, her 12-year-old son Ethan lay unconscious, surrounded by machines and wires, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The bike accident had shattered more than just the frame of Ethan's mountain bike. It had shattered the normalcy of their lives in a single phone call. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Amelia had barely left that chair for the past 3 days. She had gone through waves of panic hope, pleading prayers, and the aching, helpless stillness that only a mother watching her child fight for life could know. But nothing had shaken her more than the phone call from her own mother, Margaret. Her phone had buzzed late that afternoon. Seeing Mom flash on the screen, Amelia had felt a flicker of relief. Maybe her mother had finally understood how serious things were. She stepped into the hallway to answer. "Hi, Mom." But what she heard was like a slap. "Tomorrow is Lauren's birthday dinner. I need you to come early and help decorate." Her mother's voice was cool, efficient, as if there were no child in critical condition, as if her grandson wasn't fighting for his life. Amelia blinked, stunned. "Mom, I can't leave the hospital. Ethan hasn't even woken up yet." Margaret's reply was cutting. "If you don't come, I'll cut you off. Don't say I didn't warn you." And just like that, a lifetime of conditional love, emotional manipulation, and silent suffering narrowed into a single brutal moment. Amelia could have apologized, could have begged like she'd always done. But not this time. Not when her son needed her more than ever. She didn't reply. Instead, she ended the call and without hesitation deleted her mother's number from her contacts. For 35 years, Amelia had lived in the shadow of her younger sister Lauren, the golden child, the favorite. But as she looked back at Ethan lying still in the bed, she realized something with blinding clarity: real love doesn't ask you to choose between your child and someone's ego. That night, Amelia curled up beside her son, gripping his hand gently, and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I promise. I'm here." Amelia Parker's childhood wasn't marked by violence, but it was caged by unspoken expectations, the kind that suffocate you not through screaming, but through silence. In their picture-perfect suburban home in Virginia, everything gleamed. Her mother, Margaret, kept the house spotless, her image pristine, and her standards impossibly high. Her father, Bob, was kind but quiet, often too passive to counterbalance his wife's silent judgments. From the outside, the Parkers looked like the all-American family, but inside a subtle hierarchy reigned, and Amelia learned early on where she stood. Lauren, her younger sister by 3 years, was the golden child. She played piano by 4-1 spelling bees and talent shows, and always had a photo-worthy smile. Margaret adored her, dressed her in matching bows, and never missed a chance to highlight her accomplishments. Meanwhile, Amelia, quiet, thoughtful, athletic, and creative, was constantly compared, constantly found lacking. If only you were more like your sister. Lauren folded her laundry without being asked. "Why can't you, Lauren, so graceful and you're, well, different? No belts, no bruises, just the slow erosion of worth by 1,000 subtle cuts." Amelia never got in trouble. She got decent grades, played on the soccer team, and stayed out of drama. But no trophy, no grade, no act of obedience was ever quite enough. Eventually, she stopped trying to win her mother's approval. Instead of competing with Lauren, Amelia carved out a world of her own. She picked up a camera at a school camping trip and snapped a photo of a stray dog curled up in the grass. That image, a moment of raw, imperfect beauty, stirred something in her. It was the first time she saw something truly valuable that wasn't polished, posed, or praised. In high school, she threw herself into photography. Yearbook spreads, concert shots, candid portraits. No one at home asked to see her work, but Amelia didn't care. For once, she didn't need applause to know she'd done something meaningful. In college, she met Daniel Carter, a soft-spoken engineering major with a sharp mind and a warm heart. He wasn't interested in accolades. He loved Amelia's quirky humor, her quiet strength, and the way she saw the world through her lens. When they got engaged at 22, Margaret's reaction was as icy as expected. "You're throwing your future away for a soldier," she snapped. Amelia didn't answer. She didn't need to, because for the first time she knew what her future looked like, and it was hers to build. With Daniel, she was seen, heard, and cherished. Her wedding was small and heartfelt. Margaret attended with pursed lips and quiet critiques, but Bob, bless him, pressed an envelope into her palm as she left the altar. "I'm proud of you, Amelia," he whispered. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. By the third day in the ICU, Amelia Parker was running on fumes, physically drained, emotionally raw. She hadn't showered. Meals had become sips of cold coffee and the occasional granola bar. She lived off adrenaline and maternal instinct. Ethan still hadn't woken up. The doctors kept him in a medically induced coma to reduce brain swelling. Every hour passed like a lifetime, but Amelia never once left his side. Nurse Rachel, now on her second shift with them, gently urged Amelia to take a quick shower. At first, Amelia resisted. The idea of leaving the room even for a moment felt like betrayal. But after 3 sleepless nights, she finally relented. She gathered a change of clothes from the bag her coworker had dropped off. Just as she stood to leave, her phone vibrated. The screen lit up Mom. Amelia stared at it, her pulse quickening. She hadn't spoken to Margaret since the abrupt call 3 days ago. A small part of her hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this was a call of concern, an apology, a truce. She stepped into the hallway and answered. "Hi, Mom." Margaret's voice was crisp and businesslike. "Tomorrow is Lauren's birthday dinner. I need you here by 2 to help set up." Amelia blinked. "Mom, I can't leave the hospital. Ethan's still in critical condition." There was a pause. "Then the doctors and nurses are handling that. You being there doesn't change anything. Lauren's been planning this for weeks." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. "My son might die," she said, her voice trembling. "He has brain swelling, internal injuries." "Don't be dramatic," Margaret cut in. "He's getting the best care available. Hovering by his bedside won't save him. If you choose to skip this, don't expect our support moving forward. The college fund, emergency savings, all of it. Gone." It was a line in the sand. A threat dressed in silk, but a threat nonetheless. Love with conditions. Help as a leash. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't plead. She simply exhaled slowly. "Then do what you feel you need to do," she said, voice quiet but unshakable. "I choose my son. Not your party, not your picture-perfect facade for church friends." And she hung up. In that moment, something within her broke, but it wasn't her spirit. It was the invisible chain she'd carried since childhood. Margaret had always wielded approval as a weapon, love as a transaction. But this time, Amelia didn't fold. She didn't trade her values for acceptance. She returned to Ethan's room with a strange calmness, like someone who had finally walked through a door that had always been locked. And there he was, still unconscious, still fighting, but his small hand in hers reminded her of everything that truly mattered. Amelia leaned in, brushed her son's forehead, and whispered, "I'm not leaving, sweetheart. Not for anything. I'm here. I've got you." After the call with her mother, Amelia Parker expected to feel relief. But as she sat beside Ethan's hospital bed again, surrounded by the steady hum of monitors and machinery, doubt began to creep in. The courage she'd found just hours earlier now wavered, replaced by a quiet, aching question. Was I too harsh? Maybe she meant well. Maybe I overreacted. She looked at her unconscious son, pale, fragile still, and the weight of it all returned. The war within her reignited her duty as a daughter versus her duty as a mother. A memory surfaced an afternoon a few years ago. Amelia had been folding laundry when 7-year-old Ethan returned from a visit to his grandparents. He stood in the doorway unusually quiet. "Mom," he asked, "are we poor?" Startled, Amelia had knelt down to meet his eyes. "No, sweetheart. We have a home food school and, most importantly, each other. We're okay." Ethan had nodded but added, "Grandma said if you married someone with a real job, we'd have a big house like Aunt Lauren's." The words had hit like a punch to the gut, not just for the insult to Daniel, her late husband, but because the seeds of inadequacy were being sown in her son just as they had been in her. Now that memory rang louder than ever. Setting boundaries wasn't rebellion, it was protection. Not just for herself, but for Ethan too. She had to shield him from the comparison, the judgment, the constant feeling of never measuring up. When Nurse Rachel returned to check Ethan's vitals, she gently encouraged Amelia to grab a real meal. Reluctantly, Amelia agreed and made her way to the hospital cafeteria. The place was nearly empty in the late afternoon. She sat by the window picking at a simple meal, watching people come and go from the parking lot, living normal lives while hers had been reduced to blinking monitors and unanswered prayers. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her father. "Hey, kiddo," Bob said, his voice competing with traffic noise. "Rough day yesterday, huh?" "Did Mom tell you what she said?" Amelia asked, bracing herself. "She just said you were being disrespectful, that you refused to be there for family." Amelia sighed. "She threatened to cut off all support, the college fund, everything if I didn't leave Ethan and show up for Lauren's birthday party." There was silence on the other end. "Dad, he hasn't woken up yet," she continued, voice breaking. "I'm not asking Mom to understand, but I need you to." "I do, Amelia," he said softly. "And I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not from pain, but from the release of finally hearing what she'd needed for years: acknowledgement. Even a small one. It was enough. In that moment, she knew with clarity choosing Ethan hadn't been a betrayal of her family, it had been an act of love. Back by Ethan's hospital bed after a short, quiet meal, Amelia Parker felt something she hadn't expected: peace. Not because her son had improved, he was still unconscious, still fragile, but because for the first time in years, she'd chosen herself. All her life, Amelia had been shaped to serve. She was the easy child who didn't cause trouble, the older sister who swallowed comparisons, the military wife who stayed strong through deployments, the single mother who never let herself rest. But never once had she asked, who takes care of Amelia? This crisis had forced the question. When her mother gave her an ultimatum, choose your son or your family's approval, Amelia had picked Ethan. But now, with time to reflect, she realized it wasn't just for him. It was also the first time she allowed herself to believe she deserved better. That afternoon, Dr. Adrian Brooks stopped by. He glanced at Ethan's charts, then turned to Amelia with gentle firmness. "You've been here 4 straight days," he said. "Your body needs rest. If you want to be here for him in the long run, you need to take care of yourself too." Amelia offered a weary smile. "I can't leave him." "As a parent, I get that," Dr. Brooks said. "But as a doctor, I've seen what happens when caregivers break down. If you collapse, who's left to be strong for him?" His tone held no judgment, only truth. Later, a hospital chaplain named Mr. Reynolds stopped by. He didn't preach or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat in quiet solidarity until Amelia found herself whispering words she hadn't planned to say. "I just cut off my mother. While my son is in the ICU, I don't know if I did the right thing." The chaplain nodded thoughtfully. "Crisis has a way of exposing what's been buried. It also gives us the courage we never knew we had. But what about the money? The college fund. Everything Ethan might lose because I finally said no. You didn't sever that bond out of spite, he replied. You stopped accepting something that was harming you. Help with strings attached isn't love, it's leverage. And children need to see their mother being loved, especially by herself. Tears came then, not out of fear or guilt, but from a deep, long-held ache finally being acknowledged. For the first time, Amelia understood she deserved to be protected, not just the protector. The fourth night in the ICU began like the others, dim lights, steady machines, and Amelia seated silently at her son's bedside, holding his hand as if willing him back with her touch. Every beep of the monitor made her flinch. But tonight something felt different. A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. Like the first breeze before a storm. Around 8:30 p.m., as Nurse Kelly was doing a routine vitals check, Amelia felt a faint twitch in the small hand she held. Kelly, she whispered sharply. He moved. His fingers. Kelly immediately leaned in, checked the monitors, then knelt beside Ethan. Ethan, can you hear me? A tiny furrow appeared between Ethan's eyebrows. Then a flicker. His eyelids fluttered. Amelia leaned closer, tears already forming. Sweetheart, it's Mom. You're safe. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. One beat, then another, and then a squeeze. Weak, but real. Oh my God, Amelia gasped, covering her mouth with her free hand. Kelly quickly paged Dr. Brooks. The neurologist arrived moments later, calm, but visibly alert. He examined Ethan, testing reflexes, pupil response, light sensitivity. Then he stepped back and nodded. He's transitioning into a lighter state of consciousness. It's very encouraging. The team began reducing the sedation more aggressively, monitoring for further signs. Over the next hour, Ethan's body slowly responded. His legs twitched. His eyelids opened wider. He took shallow, voluntary breaths alongside the ventilator. Then just after 10 p.m., Ethan's eyes opened fully. Amelia froze. Her heart caught between joy and disbelief. Ethan, she whispered, can you see me? Do you know who I am? His gaze, still cloudy, eventually settled on her face. And then, barely perceptible, he nodded. It was the smallest gesture. But for Amelia, it was everything. Dr. Brooks smiled for the first time that shift. If his progress continues through the night, we'll consider extubating him in the morning. Amelia barely heard him. Her entire world had narrowed to the boy in front of her, the boy who was finally coming back. When the staff stepped out, she leaned down and kissed Ethan's forehead. I never left, baby, she whispered. I promised I'd be here, and I kept my promise. Slowly, Ethan lifted his hand again, this time with more intention. His fingers found hers, pressed gently. It wasn't just a squeeze. It was a thank you. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Amelia knew choosing to stay, no matter what anyone said, had been the most right thing she had ever done. The next morning, as Amelia helped Ethan sip water through a straw, the hospital room door swung open. Margaret entered without knocking, Lauren close behind with a silver gift bag in hand. The intrusion was immediate and jarring. There you are, Margaret said, as if Amelia had simply gone out for a walk. Your phone's been off all night. Amelia calmly set the cup down and stepped between the bed and her mother. I turned it off so I could focus on Ethan. He just woke up. Margaret glanced briefly at Ethan, her expression softening for a heartbeat before her tone returned to form. We need to talk. Outside. I'm not leaving his room, Amelia said firmly. I'm okay, Mom, Ethan whispered, voice still raspy. Amelia nodded and stepped into the hallway, positioning herself where she could still see Ethan through the glass. Margaret wasted no time. Your behavior yesterday was unacceptable. You ruined Lauren's birthday. Everyone asked where you were. The whole family was embarrassed. Amelia's hands curled into fists, but her voice remained steady. My son was in the ICU, Mom, and you're mad I didn't show up for cake. Lauren chimed in, her tone softer but still tinted with reproach. We just wanted one nice photo. A family picture. It wasn't the same without you. Amelia stood silent for a moment. A picture. They were still talking about a picture while Ethan had been fighting for his life. Mom. Lauren, she said slowly. I'm not that little girl anymore, afraid of your judgment. I don't need your approval. I stayed because I love my son. And if I had to choose again, I'd do the same. Margaret clutched her handbag tighter, her eyes sharp. If this is the attitude you plan to keep, don't expect any support from this family. Not for you, not for Ethan. Amelia inhaled deeply, but the fear was gone. In its place was clarity. You can't buy your place in our lives anymore. Love isn't a transaction. And if you came here to guilt me or hurt my child again, you can turn around right now. Without waiting for a response, she opened the hospital room door. But before stepping inside, she added, voice steady as stone. From now on, if you want to visit Ethan, you do it on my terms. Be calm. Be kind. Be brief. Or I'll have security escort you out. Margaret stood stunned. Lauren looked unsure, but Amelia didn't waver. She returned to Ethan with the calm of someone who had finally laid down a burden carried for far too long. For the first time, she was no longer the obedient daughter, she was a mother standing tall for what was right. After the tense confrontation with her mother and sister, Amelia walked back into Ethan's hospital room with shaky legs but a steadier heart. She looked at her son, now more alert, whispering something to the nurse with a tired but present voice, and she knew everything she had just let go of was worth it. Days later, the consequences arrived. A formal notice from a law firm informed her that Ethan's college fund had been closed. She and her son were officially removed from the Parker family will. No explanation, no apology. Just a legal update, as if love could be crossed out with a signature. Amelia read the message without crying. Her tears had already been shed, not for the money, but for the belief that her mother's love had ever been unconditional. But instead of falling apart, Amelia moved forward. She began taking more freelance photography jobs on the weekends, graduation portraits, family photos, even small weddings. She downsized again, renting a smaller apartment closer to Ethan's school and the hospital. Her co-workers pitched in with car rides and meal deliveries. Daniel's parents flew in to help and offered support without strings. No one mentioned inheritance. No one asked her to prove anything. One night after reviewing Ethan's 6th grade math homework, he looked up and asked, "Are we still okay, Mom?" Amelia smiled and pulled him into a hug. "We have less," she said, "but we have peace. And you know what? That's our kind of rich." In the months that followed, Ethan's recovery continued to surprise everyone. He still needed physical therapy. He still had occasional headaches, but he laughed more, slept better, and something about him seemed older, stronger. He was no longer a boy afraid of being scolded by his grandmother, but a child learning what courage looked like. Amelia, too, was becoming someone new. She no longer apologized for protecting her peace. She no longer needed permission to make choices. And she no longer looked back toward her mother's approval. She was rewriting the definition of family from scratch, a place where you don't have to play a part to be loved. 3 months after the accident, Amelia Parker and her son Ethan had entered a new phase recovery. The days of life or death urgency were behind them. Now came the slower battle, quiet, relentless, and requiring more patience than adrenaline. Ethan had returned to school part-time. His schedule was adjusted to fit his therapy and fatigue levels. He still walked with a slight limp and sometimes complained of headaches after tests, but the smile had returned real wide, unforced. Amelia watched every small milestone with a lump in her throat. There was a time when she feared she'd never hear that laughter again. Now, when she heard Ethan burst out laughing at one of Logan's silly jokes, she had to step out of the room to cry in private. Not out of sadness, but deep, grateful relief. But it wasn't just Ethan who was growing. Amelia, too, was evolving. She was no longer the woman who endured silently waiting for approval or permission. She learned to say no. She declined invitations that felt performative or draining. And most importantly, she learned to center herself without apology. Her relationship with her parents remained distant. Her father, Bob, visited occasionally, bringing small gifts, sitting with Ethan quietly, then leaving without much conversation. There was no more blame, just silence where old wounds used to throb. Margaret did not return. Lauren texted a few times, checking on Ethan, offering to bring her daughters over for a playdate. Amelia didn't refuse, but she didn't commit either. She no longer built bridges out of guilt. Instead, she nurtured healthy connections with coworkers, with friends with Daniel's parents. People who didn't share her blood, but who had shown up for her when she had nothing left. She realized family isn't defined by genetics, it's defined by presence, kindness, and consistency. Ethan, growing wiser by the day, began to notice the tension himself. One evening, while doing homework, he asked, "Does Grandma not like you?" Amelia paused, heart-twisting at the innocence of the question. "Grandma and I see the world very differently," she replied carefully. "But that doesn't define you. You have the right to be loved in a better way." That answer, gentle but honest, did more than any accusation ever could. It allowed both of them to grow. Ethan learned about self-worth. And Amelia, for the first time in her life, stopped feeling like she had to apologize for choosing her truth. One spring afternoon, with the last rays of sun streaming through the living room window, Amelia sat beside Ethan in their small apartment. He was coloring a landscape scene while she edited a client's photos on her aging laptop. Soft jazz played in the background, a new habit they'd created together since the accident. It wasn't a special day, no milestones, no grand events. But for Amelia, this was what peace truly looked like. There were no anxious texts from her mother, no pressure to prove anything, no dread of being judged, dismissed, or excluded from the family. Just her free. And Ethan, a boy growing up wrapped in unconditional love. Amelia had stopped waiting for an apology from Margaret. She finally understood some wounds don't get stitched up with a simple, "I'm sorry." Instead, she chose to end the cycle by not continuing it. She never spoke ill of Ethan's grandmother. She didn't weaponize silence. She didn't teach her son to be good just to be loved. She taught him that he had a right to his feelings, that it was okay to say no, that he could be himself even if it made others uncomfortable. And in doing so, Amelia was rewriting her family's legacy, not through wealth, not through prestigious lineage, but by raising a new generation untouched by the scars of the past. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he hugged her and whispered, "Mom, thank you for never leaving me." Amelia smiled, tears welling up. "I'll always be here, sweetheart. Not because I have to, but because I choose to every single day." The door to the past no longer creaked when she looked back. It still existed, but it was closed now, not locked, not erased, just no longer a place where she lived. Amelia had stepped beyond it and wasn't going back.